The desert night was supposed to be their cover. 381 Navy SEALs moved like shadows, their boots silent on the canyon floor. They had been inserted for a classified mission: disrupt an enemy weapons convoy, destroy the cache, and exfiltrate before dawn. Standard procedure, or so command had assured them. But nothing about that night was standard. The canyon walls loomed high and jagged, a labyrinth of rock and dust that offered only one way in and one way out. As the SEALs advanced deeper, the radios crackled with static, brief at first, then steady, like something jamming the frequencies. Still, the mission pressed on. Then, it happened. The first explosion ripped through the canyon mouth behind them. Rock groaned. Boulders cascaded like thunder, sealing the only exit. Dust blinded their vision. Shouts of "Cover! Cover!" echoed as men dove for shelter. Seconds later, a second detonation lit the night at the far end. The canyon's front collapsed under a wave of fire, sealing them in completely. The SEAL commander, a man who had seen too many ambushes in too many countries, shouted into his headset. "Command, we're cut off. Canyon's compromised. Repeat, we are trapped." The only reply was silence. And then, enemy fire. Machine guns rattled from the cliffs above, spraying down into the canyon like rain. Mortars thumped. Snipers picked at movement in the dust. The SEALs returned fire, but they knew the truth instantly. They were boxed in, outnumbered, outgunned, no way out. "Sir, what are our orders?" a young operator shouted, crouched behind a slab of broken rock. The commander didn't answer immediately. His eyes scanned the canyon walls, the sealed exits, the chaos. Finally, his voice was grim. "Hold positions. Conserviamo. Command will figure something out." But deep down, even he knew. Command had no plan for this. Back at base, miles away, radios lit up with fragments of their distress call. Static swallowed words, but the message was clear enough. 381 SEALs trapped. Inside the operations tent, generals leaned over maps, faces pale. "They're done," one officer muttered. "We can't get air support in that canyon. It's suicide," another shook his head. "Ground rescue would take hours. By then, they'll all be dead." Hopeless silence filled the room, until a voice broke it. "I can get them out." All eyes turned. She stood at the edge of the tent, flight suit still dusted from her last sortie, short-cropped hair, calm eyes that didn't flinch under the weight of generals' stares. Her name? Captain Aaron Cole. Call sign, Valkyrie. The youngest A-10 pilot in her wing, often underestimated, often dismissed as too reckless for command's liking. But in the cockpit, she was something else entirely, fearless, precise, relentless. A colonel frowned. "The canyon's too narrow. One wrong angle, you'll shred our men along with the enemy." Cole didn't blink. "Not if I fly it right." The room erupted with protests. "Too risky, too dangerous, too insane." But she cut through their noise with one quiet line. "If they're still breathing, I'll get them out." The commander of the SEALs, still trapped in the canyon, barked into his failing comms. "We're sitting ducks here. Somebody do something!" And somewhere far above the desert, engines roared to life. The Valkyrie was already airborne. The desert sky was black, moonless and cruelly quiet. That silence broke in an instant. 2 engines howled, low and thunderous. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, affectionately called the Warthog, clawed its way into the night. At the controls sat Captain Aaron Valkyrie Cole, her jaw set, her eyes locked on the map glowing faintly on her HUD. Most pilots would have said no. The canyon was too tight. The angle's impossible. Anti-air defenses scattered like landmines across the ridges. A single mistake meant slamming into rock or taking a missile in the belly. But Valkyrie wasn't most pilots. Inside the canyon, the SEALs huddled in the shadows of collapsed stone. Enemy gunfire still hammered down, forcing them to duck and crawl for cover. Ammunition was dwindling fast. Men who had survived 100 firefights were whispering the same unthinkable word. "We're done." Then, above the chaos, a new sound rolled through the canyon. Not enemy jets. Not mortars, something heavier, meaner. The growl of an A-10. One SEAL looked up through the dust, eyes wide. "No way." They actually sent her. At 5,000 feet, Cole flipped her comms to the open channel, where enemy voices had been mocking the trapped Americans all night. She keyed in, her voice cold steel. "Attention hostiles. You have one chance to retreat. Refuse, and you'll hear the song of the GAU-8. Laughter erupted on the enemy frequency. Broken English, mocking tones. You cannot fly in canyon. You kill your own men. Americans already buried. Cole didn't answer. She banked hard, pulling her A-10 into a dive. Her cockpit shook violently as she dropped into the canyon, the walls streaking past like knives. Alarms screamed, missile lock, but she didn't flinch. Fingers danced over switches, eyes locked on the digital crosshair. The SEAL commander's radio hissed with static. Suddenly a new voice cut through. "This is Valkyrie. Hold your positions." Every trapped man froze. For the first time in hours, hope flickered. The first run was for survival. Cole yanked the A-10 sideways, skimming the canyon wall with barely 30 feet of clearance. A surface-to-air missile streaked past her wingtip, exploding harmlessly against the cliff. She rolled, inverted, then straightened, an impossible maneuver in a plane that heavy. But the Warthog obeyed her like an extension of her own body. The second run was for vengeance. "Guns hot," she whispered, and pressed the trigger. The GAU-8 Avenger cannon roared, a 30mm storm spitting nearly 4,000 rounds per minute. The canyon floor erupted in fire and dust. Enemy emplacements shattered like toys. Trucks disintegrated. Mortar crews vanished in flame. From below, the SEALs erupted in cheers. "She's clearing the cliffs." One shouted, "She's buying us breathing room." But the enemy wasn't done. Yelled, returning fire Dozens of fighters poured into the canyon rim. RPGs slung over shoulders. Anti-air guns swung toward the diving jet. Radio chatter filled with their confidence. This was where the American pilot would die. Cole's lips curved into the faintest smile. "Let's dance." She dove again, this time lower. So low the SEALs swore they could see the pilot's helmet glinting through the canopy. Her cannon ripped through the rim, shredding bunkers and tearing open enemy firing lines. The enemy's laughter turned to panic on the open channel. A frantic voice screamed in their language, "It's her, the Valkyrie!" The same name they once used in ridicule, now spoken in fear. When the dust settled, Cole pulled the Warthog into a climb, banking wide over the canyon. Smoke trailed across the cliffs, flames lighting up the night like daylight. Down below, 381 SEALs were alive. Still trapped, still surrounded, but for the first time since the ambush, they had space to breathe, and the faint outline of a miracle beginning to take shape. Over comms, Cole's voice returned, steady as ever. "Hold tight, boys. I'm not done yet." The canyon was still choking with smoke, but the enemy refused to break. Fresh fighters rushed along the cliffs, dragging heavy machine guns into position. Mortars thumped from hidden pits. Tracer fire lit up the walls like fireworks. Every time the SEALs thought they had a moment's peace, another volley rained down. Pinned against stone, the commander spat dust from his mouth. His men were running low on ammo, bruised, battered, and cornered. Hope was a fragile thread, and even that was unraveling. Then his comms crackled again. "Commander, this is Valkyrie. You're still sealed in, right?" "Affirmative," he barked. "No way out unless we start climbing. And that's suicide with snipers on the rim." There was a pause, long enough for him to think she'd given up. Then her voice returned, calm and absolute. "Then I'll make you one." Cole climbed the Warthog high above the canyon, tracing its contours with her eyes. To most pilots, it was just jagged rock. To her, it was a puzzle. And every puzzle had a solution. Her mind raced. "If I line the run perfectly, if I time the Avenger bursts, if I can hit the weak points in the rock face..." She swallowed. One chance, one mistake, and she'd crush the SEALs under a mountain of stone. Her thumb hovered over the trigger. "All right, boys, brace yourselves." The SEALs heard her engines before they saw her. That guttural roar shook the ground under their boots. Men ducked, some shielding their helmets, others peering upward in disbelief. "She's coming in low. Way too low," a young operator yelled. "No," the commander said, watching the A-10 angle nose down, sparks of cannon fire flashing in the distance. "She's not attacking them. She's aiming at the canyon." Then the GAU-8 thundered, 30mm shells ripped into the canyon wall like a jackhammer from hell. The ground trembled. Rock screamed and split. A thunderclap of stone collapsing shook the valley as boulders exploded outward in a storm of dust. When the smoke cleared, the seals stared wide-eyed. Where there had once been a solid wall of stone, there was now a jagged, smoking gap. A man-sized corridor punched straight through the canyon's flank. "Holy, she actually did it," one whispered. The commander didn't waste a second. "That's our exit. Move, move, move!" But the enemy saw it too. Dozens of fighters swarmed the rim above the new breach, pouring gunfire into the canyon floor to cut the seals off. Mortar crews scrambled, desperate to collapse the gap before the Americans could escape. Cole's voice returned on comms, sharp as a blade. "Keep pushing to that exit. I'll keep it open." And she did. Her Warthog swept in again, cannon blazing, rockets tearing through enemy bunkers, bombs cratering the ridgelines. Every pass she made shook the canyon like an earthquake. The seals surged toward the breach, covering one another, bullets sparking inches from their boots. Men who had felt death breathing down their necks for hours now sprinted with fire in their veins. "Almost there," someone shouted. Cole's HUD lit up with alarms. "Fuel low, munitions low, warning." Warning, she ignored them. "All that matters," she muttered, "is that they get out." Pulling into her tightest turn yet, she unleashed her final barrage, the GAU-8's roar drowning out every other sound. Enemy fighters scattered, some abandoning their posts entirely, unwilling to face the storm. Down below, 381 seals poured through the smoke and into the corridor she had carved with fire and steel. For the first time since the ambush, they were outside the canyon. Free. The commander's voice cut through the comms, hoarse but unshaken. "Valkyrie, the exit's open. We're moving. You just gave 381 men their lives back." From her cockpit, Cole allowed herself a single breath of relief. "Good. Now let's get you home." The breach had given them hope, but hope didn't guarantee survival. The seals poured through the jagged gap in the canyon wall, stumbling into the open desert. Fresh air filled their lungs, but freedom brought no safety. The enemy wasn't retreating. They were rallying. Columns of fighters emerged from the dunes, headlights of armored trucks cutting through the dust. Machine guns mounted on the backs opened fire, spraying the open ground. Mortars arced overhead, cratering the sand dangerously close to the fleeing seals. The commander barked orders, his voice raw. "Form perimeter. Cover the wounded! Keep moving toward the LZ!" But deep down, he knew what they all feared. Without extraction, they wouldn't last another hour. Then, over the comms, a new voice cut in. Deep, steady, urgent. "This is Eagle Flight, inbound with Black Hawks. Sit tight. We're 5 mics out." Relief rippled through the battered seals. Helicopters were coming, but 5 minutes could be a lifetime under fire. Above them, Valkyrie wheeled her A-10 in a wide arc, surveying the chaos. Ammunition counters blinked red. She had only a few cannon bursts left, maybe one pass with her rockets. Her fuel gauge was sinking dangerously low. Command's voice crackled in her ear. "Valkyrie, you've done enough. Break off and RTB." Her eyes narrowed. On the ground, she could see tiny figures, the seals, dragging their wounded, trying to form a defensive circle. Trucks closing in fast, enemy mortars walking closer every second. She ignored command. "Negative. I don't leave until they're wheels up." The first Black Hawk appeared on the horizon, blades chopping the air, lights dimmed. Then another and another. 4 birds, skimming low, engines straining under the weight of the desperate mission. But the landing zone was already a battlefield. Gunfire laced the desert floor. The helos would be torn apart before they could touch down, unless someone cleared it. "Valkyrie," the SEAL commander's voice came through, steady despite the chaos. "We need 30 seconds. Just 30, she exhaled. "Roger that. I'll give you 60. The Warthog dropped like a hawk. Cannon fire shredded the lead convoy, trucks flipping and burning. A rocket streaked into an enemy mortar pit, silencing it in a burst of fire. She banked left, raking the ground with her last shells, carving a burning line between the SEALs and their pursuers. The Black Hawks descended through the smoke, rotors whipping up storms of dust. Side gunners leaned out, pouring suppressive fire across the battlefield. "Move! Move! Move!" the commander shouted, waving his men forward. SEALs hauled the injured, sprinting through the haze, diving into the waiting helicopters. But the enemy wasn't finished. A final wave surged from the dunes, RPGs on their shoulders, aiming directly at the helicopters as they lifted off. Cole saw it instantly. No ammo left. No rockets. No time. She shoved the throttle forward, engines screaming as she dropped to treetop level. The Warthog thundered over the battlefield, skimming so low the enemy fighters ducked in panic. Her sheer presence broke their aim, RPGs firing wild into the night. The Blackhawks rose, climbing away with 381 souls crammed inside. On the comms, the SEAL commander's voice cracked with emotion. "All accounted for. We're airborne, Valkyrie. You saved us." Cole pulled the A-10 into a climb, her gauges screaming empty. She'd pushed the jet to its absolute limit. As the helicopters faded into the distance, she finally allowed herself a small smile. "Not saved," she whispered into the quiet cockpit. "Just given a fighting chance." The desert below still burned, but above it, 4 helicopters carried 381 men who should have been dead, and every single one of them knew why they were alive. The helicopters thundered across the desert night, rotors hammering against the air. Inside, the SEALs sat shoulder to shoulder, bruised, bloodied, exhausted, but alive. Some cradled wounds hastily wrapped with bandages. Others leaned back against the cabin wall, eyes closed in disbelief that they were still breathing. None spoke at first. They were too drained, too stunned. Finally, one of the youngest broke the silence. "I thought we were done down there." Another chuckled hoarsely. "We were, until she showed up." Every head in the helicopter nodded. No one needed to ask who she was. Back at base, the operations tent was silent when the first reports came in. Generals and analysts leaned forward, hardly believing the words scrolling across the screens. All 381 accounted for. Extraction complete. One general muttered in disbelief. "That's impossible. They should have been buried in that canyon." But another officer, grinning for the first time that night, said quietly, "Not impossible. Just Valkyrie." Hours later, the SEALs staggered off the helicopters. Dust clung to their uniforms, faces lined with exhaustion. The base's medics rushed forward, guiding the wounded onto stretchers, pressing water bottles into parched hands. At the edge of the landing pad stood Captain Erin Valkyrie Cole, helmet tucked under her arm, flight suit streaked with sweat and soot. She looked nothing like the myth already forming around her name, just a pilot, calm and steady, watching to make sure her men had truly made it home. The SEAL commander walked straight toward her. His uniform was shredded, a bloody bandage wrapped around his arm, but his stride was strong. He stopped in front of her and simply held out his hand. She gripped it firmly. "You didn't just fly tonight," he said, his voice low, but carrying enough weight for those nearby to hear. "You pulled 381 men out of hell. If there's a word stronger than thank you, that's what we owe you." Cole gave the faintest nod. "Just doing my job." The commander shook his head. "No, you did the impossible." Word spread faster than wildfire, across the base, across the theater, across every unit linked into the network. Stories grew with each telling, how she'd dropped into the canyon when no one else dared, how she'd carved an escape through solid rock, how the enemy themselves had whispered her call sign in fear. By morning, Valkyrie wasn't just a pilot's handle, it was legend. In the following days, Cole faced the inevitable. Debriefings, paperwork, the stern faces of generals demanding explanations for her reckless flying. But none of it mattered, because waiting in the wings were the testimonies of 381 Navy SEALs who had only one thing to say: she saved us. The official record would later note her actions as extraordinary valor under impossible circumstances. But among the soldiers who had lived through that night, the words were simpler, heavier, and far more permanent. "We were dead men. Valkyrie gave us back our lives." That night, long after the dust had settled and the base had quieted, Captain Cole sat alone near the flight line. The Warthog that had carried her through fire and fury was grounded beside her, its paint scorched, its guns empty, its tanks bone dry. She rested her hand on the battered fuselage. "You did good," she whispered to the machine, though she knew it was more than the jet. It was the choices, the risks, the refusal to turn away when everyone else had. In the silence of the desert, she let herself breathe, knowing tomorrow would bring new missions, new dangers. But tonight she had proven something no one could ever take back. That when everything was lost, and 381 men had no way out, one pilot, one jet, and one unbreakable will could change the ending. The following week, the base cafeteria buzzed with whispers. Soldiers who had never met Captain Cole craned their necks just to glimpse her walking past. A-10 pilots, normally a tight, competitive circle, greeted her with nods heavy with respect. She hadn't asked for any of it. She hadn't flown into that canyon for glory or recognition. She had done it because, in her eyes, leaving men behind was never an option. But legends have a way of spreading without permission, and this one spread like fire. When the SEALs returned home, their after-action reports became stories, and those stories became something more. Families of the rescued men spoke her name in gratitude. Young recruits repeated it with awe. Even hardened veterans, skeptical of hero stories, found themselves silent when the numbers were spoken. Aloud, 381, one left behind. It was the kind of victory that changed, the tone of a war. But Cole herself was uneasy. One evening, her squadron commander found her sitting beside her A-10 again, staring at the desert horizon as the sun bled into the sand. "You've been quiet," he said. She shrugged. "Everyone's making it sound like I won the war." "I didn't. I just got lucky." The commander chuckled. "That wasn't luck, Aaron. That was skill. That was guts. And whether you like it or not, you gave people something they needed." She frowned. "What's that?" "Hope." Her call sign, Valkyrie, took on a new weight. Originally, it had been a playful jab from flight school, referencing the mythic maidens who carried the dead from battle. But now, soldiers used it with reverence, because she hadn't carried the dead. She had delivered the living. A month later, during a joint forces briefing, the mission was dissected in cold clinical terms: coordinates, armaments, timing. Generals debated the risks. Politicians argued about rules of engagement. But then the SEAL commander stood up, his voice cutting through the noise. "You can break this down however you want," he said, glaring at the room. "But the truth is simple. We were trapped, surrounded, and doomed. And because of her, every one of my men came home." That's the whole story. Silence fell. Even the generals who once dismissed her as reckless had no rebuttal. Not long after, a new pilot joined her squadron. Wide-eyed, nervous, still learning the rhythms of war. He caught her after a flight one evening. "Ma'am," he stammered, "is it true you flew into a canyon under enemy fire to pull out SEALs?" She gave him a small smile. "Something like that." He swallowed hard. "I just wanted to say, that's why I signed up for this. Because if I'm ever in that kind of fire, I'd want someone like you overhead." Her smile faded into something softer, heavier. She realized then that her actions had become more than survival. They had become a standard, a promise that others would now measure themselves against. That night, she wrote in her journal, a habit she had kept since flight school, "They once called me reckless. A liability, maybe I still am. But if recklessness is refusing to watch men die when I can change the ending, then I'll wear that label forever." The story of the canyon didn't end on official reports. It lived in the barracks, in whispered retellings around campfires, in the quiet prayers of families who got their loved ones back. It lived in the nervous smiles of recruits who found courage by repeating her call sign. And for her, it became a reminder every time she stepped into the cockpit. Because now, the world didn't just see her as a pilot. She was the pilot. The one who turned a canyon of death into a corridor of life. The one who proved that even against impossible odds, a single determined soul could hold back the dark from liability. To indispensable, from overlooked, to unforgettable, from Aaron Cole to Valkyrie.